In the worksheet we're seeing on the screen here, in cell G2, we want to calculate the tax rate. But rather than actually calculating it, we want to look up the information in a tax table. Now, yellow cells to the right comprise the information of the tax table that we actually need. This might be in a different worksheet or in a different workbook, but for ease of use in setting up the example, it's very helpful to have this nearby, at least for a while, as we're testing a lookup function here. The appropriate lookup function to find information from this left column will be a VLOOKUP. We're trying to find this salary's location within here. The logic of VLOOKUP, as used in an example like this, is we're not trying to find an exact match here, but what's called an approximate match. And the logic is simply the way most people would probably think this out. We're looking at 41,000. We look down the table until we find a value that's too large. That would be the 45,000. We revert to the previous row, and then we're going to indicate that the answers will come out of the second column of the table. Now, VLOOKUP, by definition, means look vertically down the left column. The entries in column J, as we see them in the yellow table there, must be in ascending order as we read downward. And we must cover the low end, not necessarily the high end. Now, in this case, 0, and we'd never have a negative salary, so we're fine there. But do be careful about using VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUP situations where you've got not all values covered properly. So we're trying to look at this value right here, F2, comma, and then we highlight the table. In this case, it's the 2 columns. We are going to be copying this down column G, so we have to be thinking about the absolute reference. We want this reference to stay frozen. So we can either highlight this, that's just as easy, I've done it, hit the F4 key to make that an absolute reference. Comma, we now indicate what the column index number is, and you'll see that reference right here. Now it's literally column K, but within the table it's the second column. And that's all we need for an approximate lookup. We don't need any other parameters, just these 3. And the answer here, if we're looking ahead, should be 6%. And it's not displayed that way. A quick adjustment there on the Home tab, the percent button, and we won't need any decimals, so that's good enough. Now, nothing wrong with this, literally. This will work, and of course, in a real-life situation, what you should do is check this out on a few cells, make sure it's making sense, working properly. It appears to be. If you'd like greater clarity in the function, you might consider giving this a range name. You can do this very simply by highlighting this data, and in the name box that's to the left of the formula bar, click the drop arrow. Other range names that might be in this workbook are listed there. Let's call this tax table. Range names cannot have spaces. You can use upper and lowercase. They cannot begin with numbers. Other than that, it's pretty free form. By giving this a name, we then have the opportunity to change our formula, and instead of using this, which again is not wrong, but it certainly makes the formula a bit awkward, it looks complicated and so on, simply change this to tax table. Now you can either type this or hit the F3 key to get a list of them and pull out the one you want that way, or simply highlight the cells in question. Since it has a name, as soon as we get down to the bottom there, the name automatically pops in. And we could then copy this down to these cells. We'd see that we get the exact same answers. And if we wanted to do this for the entire column, just double click and it goes all the way down the column. So this function, even though it seems not to be telling us what it's doing, is very efficient, very powerful. And I would emphasize again the idea that the table might be in a different location. If we move the table to a different worksheet, the formula automatically adjusts. Of course, it could have been there from the beginning. Same thing applies if we put this in a different workbook. VLOOKUP, if you don't use it for a while, you'll probably forget how it works and you'll have to revisit it. An if function possibly is more clear in what it does, but it would be unthinkable in situations like this. To also emphasize the idea that not all tables are just 2 columns, scroll to the right here a bit, and you'll see a similar kind of list, but the orange table has many, many columns based on the number of dependents. And I want to show you this example because sometimes you've got to get a little bit creative here. If you look at this information for a bit, and you're looking at Claudia Johnson and her salary, you would focus on the fact that her tax rate is going to come out of this row here for the $55,000. Her salary hasn't reached $60,000. It's $56,600. The answers are going to come out of here. And when you're looking at her dependents here, it's 2. Then you'd be focused on this column right here. And right where they intersect, right there, 10.9% is going to be her tax rate. But the more you would think about this, the more you would say, well, how do I figure out which column it is? This is not the second column. Within this table here, and this is the actual table we'll be using, within this table, it's the 4th column. So if someone has 2 dependents, the answer is going to come out of the 4th column. And the more you check this out back and forth, the more you would realize is that the number of dependents and the column we need are always off by 2. So if you have 2 dependents, the answer will come out of the 4th column. If you have 4 dependents, it's going to come out of the 6th column, and so on. So here we've got to use VLOOKUP in a more creative way. We're trying to look up the salary, comma, and here's the table here. These orange cells. A range of cells that has a range name. The range name will pop into place automatically. It's called a tax DEP table. Comma. So which column has the answer? No matter what the dependents are, the column that's needed here needs to be greater than that by 2. So we will use the reference to the dependents here, plus 2. And we should get the correct answer here. Remember, we're looking for 10.9%. There we go. And simply double-clicking, we should copy this down the column. And of course, you'd want to check out a few answers. How about David Christinelli here makes $26,000? We'd be looking in this row right here. And David has 3 dependents, 2.6%. That's what we're seeing here. That's what we're seeing over there. So it does make sense. It does point out again, though, that there will be times that you have to come up with your own scheme for figuring out which column is here. And in this example, too, we're talking about an approximate match. It's highly unlikely that any one of these salaries will match up perfectly with this. Some lookup tables are huge. And here, too, based on our previous example, at least when you're setting this up, put the table nearby, then later. As you get more proficient with this, that's certainly not as necessary, but at least at first, make the tables be nearby to set these up. So this is an example of a VLOOKUP that extends the capability into multiple columns.